using that chat messenger app, we're going to see how we can handle Python syntax and output, user input and variables, message length check, formatting and cleaning messages, storing and viewing charts, and then organizing our code with functions. These are very basic fundamental areas of Python, and we're going to see how we can cover them today. So the first thing we're going to look at is the basic syntax and outputs. And for every phase, what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to state the problem. Remember, we have a project, and then we've broken it down into like different phases. So for each phase, we're going to have a goal or a challenge or a problem, and then we're going to see what aspects of Python we're going to cover, and then we're going to see what the solution looks like. So the first thing we want to do is we want to display a welcome message for PyChat. PyChat is a messenger app, and so we want a welcome message. When it comes to programming, there's a way you have to think. You have to consider not just yourself, who is the person developing the code, you also have to consider the user. So I have this diagram that I'm creating where the programmer has actually 3 people to consider. Whenever you're writing a program, you're not just thinking about yourself, you're thinking about 3 entities or 3 people. First person is yourself. Second person is the tool, in this case is Python, and the third person is the user. You must be able to manage these 3 people whenever you're writing programs. Now, somebody who just goes to play a game is only thinking about himself. He has no idea who wrote the program or anything. He has no idea about the tool. All you just want to do is play the game or watching the movie. All you just want to do, you're thinking about yourself. But as a programmer, you need to think about the user. You need to be broad in terms of how you are going about it. And then you also have to think about the tool you're using. What does Python offer? How can Python help me to do this task? And so that's why it's important, for example, that we need to have a welcome message. So we are designing a chat messenger app. When users launch the app or, access what we have designed, we need to have a message for them. We need to display something to welcome them. Okay, so that's why we have these goals. We want to just display a message at the beginning. So one other thing you also want to consider as a programmer is that you need to plan what would happen at the beginning. When people are using your app, or people are using your game, or people are using your software, what happens at the beginning? What happens as they are using it? And what happens at the end? So at the beginning here, we just want to have a welcome message. And how are we going to do that? So now we're beginning to think about the tool. We have a goal. Okay, that's what we want to do. That goal is to serve the user. And then how do we achieve the goal? We have to start thinking about the tool. Now, to display this welcome message, we need the print function. And then we're also going to be working with escape characters. Those are the 2 things we want to work with. And then eventually, we just want to say, welcome to PyChat, and then start typing your message. So we're already guiding the user on how to use our app. So that's what we need to do. So now let's see the solution. So now this file, I'm going to make it available. So you can use this file to practice, and you can use this file online. So you don't even necessarily need to install anything. You can use it online, and then you use it on Google Colab. So when you go to Google Colab, and you sign in using your Gmail, you can go to Google Colab, and then you can have this platform to start writing and running Python codes. So this particular file that we have has 2 parts. So we have the part where it kind of gives you the lecture, and then you have the part where it gives you the code, which is very, very nice, because what happens is you don't need to go somewhere else to find the lecture. You have both the lecture and the code here. So how do we know? This is the lecture. You get to see it, and then you have it in sections like this. You have it in different sections, and then whenever you come to a place where you have this triangle here, then you have the code, so you can run it. All right, so now what is going to happen is I probably won't be typing because the codes are already here. We're going to be looking at them understanding them, and then going through them. So remember that what we want to do is print this message on 2 lines. So the first thing is welcome to pie charts, and the second thing is start typing your message. Welcome to pie chart, start typing your message. That's what we want to print. So now when you look at it, you see that, like we have been observing, we are using functions to do our tasks. In this case, we're using the print function. The print function is a function that can help us display a message or display an output, and we have used it here. We also saw that when it comes to functions, they have these parentheses. So you see these brackets in blue here. That is how we can identify a function. So once you see the name, so you see a name, like in this case, print, and then you see these brackets, then you know you're dealing with a function in Python, and also the same in many other programming languages. So it just helps you do a task. And in this case, whatever you have in between these brackets, in this case, in strings, will be printed on the screen. Now we have this phase 1 solution here, and that's just a comment. So this is not part of the code. This is just a comment. So this is just to help the programmer understand what is happening. Is not connected to the user. So you see this phase 1 solution in green has nothing to do with the user, but something to do with the programmer. Okay, so once you see the code like that, just understand this is the main part of the code, and then this is just for documentation. So now that we have it, it's pretty straightforward, and we also see that we are dealing with strings. We put the strings in double quotes, so you can see these double quotes here, and then you see these double quotes here. Everything between double quotes is a string. Is a string, or we can call it maybe a text, or we can just call it English language. And so when I run this, I'm expecting to see 2 things printed, each one for the print function, and then we should have 2 lines. So let me run it. So I'm running it, and I'm supposed to see the result under. So essentially what is happening here is that the file which has our code is grouped into different sections. So when I run it like this, it's only this section that runs. So you can see the output. Welcome to pie chart. Start typing your message. Now I want to highlight something. In actual practice of the app, the user will not be seeing the code. I hope you know. The user won't be seeing the code. All they will probably be seeing is just this button, maybe to start or to initiate. So you also have to imagine it in that way, that this is just like a test development environment where we are still building the code. And that's why for us as the programmer, we are able to see both the code and the outputs. But of course, the user will not be seeing the code. Okay, so that's just another thing to understand. This is just a development environment. This is just a development environment where we are building. And that's why we as a programmer has access to both the code and the results. So that's something to note about. Now we move to phase 2. In phase 2 now, we're going to look at user input and variables. User input and variables. Now, what is our task? We want to ask the user for their name and greet them. So the first time we just printed a message for them. Now we are trying to get something from the user. We want their name, and then we want to have a customized greeting for them based on their name. Okay, so this is an extension of what we did before. What we did before, we just needed the print function. Now, in addition to the print function, we need the input function. So you see input here, and it has that bracket that tells you it's a function, and it helps you to achieve something. Then we need variables to store the data. That's another important concept in programming. And then we need formatted strings. So what's the challenge? Prompt the user for their name and then print. So you can have hello, then you have the user's name, then you have a comma, then you now say welcome to pie chart. So that's the second challenge. How are we going to do it? Let's look at the code. Or how do we even break it down first? First thing is that we would prompt the user. We'll make a request to the user for them to supply their name. Then we need to store whatever has been supplied in a variable. And then we now need to take that variable, add it to a string, and print it. So this is very basic. This is very basic. And we have the solution here. So we have the solution here. So what we have is the print function here. So now this is the print function. Sorry, the input function. So we've got the input function and we've got a message. So you have to begin to observe the syntax. You have to begin to observe the syntax. So you can see that in the syntax, just like in the print function, you have double quotes. So you have double quotes and then you enter whatever you want to enter inside. So that tells you that the print function can take string. The input function too can take string. What is a string? The string is whatever you write in double quotes. So we're going to put a string into the input function, and that input function is going to request the user to make an entry, and whatever the user is making, we have to store it in a variable called name. So that is what this line does. That's just what this line does. This line uses a function called input to receive some information, to request some information from the user. When the user supplies it, it is stored in a variable. Very important. So one thing to note is that whenever an operation is done or an activity is done in a programming language and a result has been obtained, is always standard that you store that result in a variable. You store that result in a variable. So please, let's take note of that. That's one of the common practices in programming languages. You use functions to do an activity. Whenever that activity is giving a result, you need to store it in a variable. So print was not necessarily giving a result. It was just doing the activity. And then once it does the activity and prints, that's all. But input is giving a result. And what is that result? Whatever the user enters. And then whatever the user enters will change. So my name is different from your name. So if I'm the user, I'll put my name. Sometimes I might even put my first name and my last name, so it's always going to change. And that's why it's called a variable. It varies, it changes. But as whatever is entered, we're going to take note of it. So variables are things that change, and then there are things we want to take note of. And then we come to the second line. So this is the second line. Here we have the print function, but we're using the print function in a different way. So let's try to compare. See where we use the print function here. It was a simple use of the print function on this line. All we needed to do was just put whatever we wanted to print in double quotes. So we're just printing a string. This is pretty easy, pretty straightforward. But when it comes to here, we are not just printing a string. We're not just printing a string. We're printing both a string and a variable that we're going to put inside. So when you look at these two lines of code, you begin to have an understanding of how programming works. Programming or coding works in such a way that there is a logic. So what's the logic here? You look at this print statement and you begin to find out that this print statement has name, and that name is the variable here. So you see the connection. Line 1 and line 2 are connected. When you look at programs, you're trying to establish the connections. So programming is something that you need to be very detailed for you to do well in it. So when you look at these two lines, you should be able to spot that there is something in line 2 that is also in line 1. So you begin to spot the connections. You begin to, you see name here. You're looking for where name also occurred. There is name here. Then you now want to find out, okay, what is the value of name? You now see is the input. So you now begin to study your codes to see where did it start from? Where did it start from? So when you're looking at the code, you are studying it, you see it actually started from this input function here. That input function performed an activity, a result was obtained. That result is what the user entered, and that result was given to the name variable, and that name variable was now sent to this print function. So you see, you need to establish that connection before you can understand the code. So now when we come to this print function, what we now see is a formatted string. And we see that this is a bit different. So what you have is you have the print function, then you have F immediately after the open parenthesis. You have F, then you now have the string here. So by the time you put that F there, you are formatting the string. Okay, so let's look at the basic use here. Here you don't have any F, you just have the string. It's straightforward. But whenever you want to introduce something into that string, something external, in this case the name, then you can use this formatted string. So by the time you put your F here, whatever you want to introduce, you now put it in these brackets. Now we're beginning to learn Python syntax or Python rules. So we know that we've known the rule for the standard print function using strings. Now we are now learning the rule for the formatted string in a print function. So this is the thing. The rule is that you put your F there, Python begins to know that this is a formatted string. Then you put your double quotes at the beginning and at the end. So the entire thing there is a string. But wherever you want to put in something external, in this case, the name variable, you put this brace here. Okay, I hope it's straightforward. So that's just an additional rule for us to know. Whenever Python sees this brace in the midst of a string, then what it will do, it will now go and start searching for where that value is. And that is the connection. So that's just the logic. That's the logic. It's like playing a puzzle game. You need to know where it starts, where it ends, and the connections. That's just what programming is all about. You need to know where does it start from? Where does it end? What is the goal? What is the logic? What are the connections? What are the variables are what you use to do those connections. The functions are what you use to do the activities. Okay, I hope this is clear. Please, if there are any issues, call my attention. Now let me run it, and I've started running it, and then you see. So that's the input function at work. It says, enter your name. Okay, so I'm going to enter my name, and let me just use somebody whose name is here, Tekuma. And then after entering the name, I press enter. And then can you see that? Hello, Tekuma. Welcome to PyChat. Now, why is this important? This is important because now we're beginning to consider the user. We're not just giving a general welcome. We're giving a customized welcome. And then you appreciate that when the user sees their name, wow, that strikes some connection. And then you see, this is more of it's a more user-friendly welcome than the previous one. This one was just welcome to PyChat, start typing your message. This one is like enter your name, and then I could even go ahead and say enter your name and press enter. Because when the user enter their name, if they don't know that they have to press enter, then they are just waiting. So, but just enter your name and press enter, and then we have this customized message. So now we begin to see that we have used an additional Python rule here. And in this case, we have seen how to format our string in a print function. And we've also seen how to assign, the results of the input function to the name variable and then use it. So we see the connections here. All right, so let's move to the next one. Well, at this stage, please, I want to ask if there's any, question or anything, please just let me know. Next, we're moving to phase 3. Remember, we're dealing with a chat messenger app, and we have been dealing with different types of challenges or mini problems in the course of building this app. And now we are up to phase 3. Now, this phase 3 is kind of like what I did the last class, So we're using the learn function as already. But I'm just trying to make it a bit easier to understand in this class. And that's why we have it now in phase 3. So what's our goal? We want to ensure messages are 200 characters or less. We have gone past the step of welcoming the user. Now we want to tell the user, are we going to tell the user? I'm not too sure. We're going to tell the user, and then we're going to, ensure that what the user enters meets our criteria. Of course, so it's a chat messenger app, but we are not going to throw it open for the user to enter any length of chats. So if you remember, one of the closest social media platforms that has this rule is X or Twitter. So, when you go to Twitter, you can't go there and write a book. You can't go there and write, very lengthy, tweets. They are restricted. So now we're trying to understand how some of these things are programmed. Okay, so now ensure messages are 200 characters or less. And to do that task, we need to use the learn function. So can you begin to realize now that functions are so valuable in programming? You use them to do different tasks. You use functions. So one of the hints or the tips I would say is that when it comes to programming, whenever you have a challenge, you're always trying to find out which function can help me do this. Which function? If you find a function that can help you do whatever you want to do, it becomes easy. All you just need to do is call the function and then find out the result that function is giving you. That's how easy programming is. You usually will have a challenge when you don't have a function that does that. When you don't have a function that does what you want to do, then what do? You now start creating your own function. You start creating your own function, and the function that you create will also have some of the other built-in functions inside it. So what happens is, as a programmer, you are creating functions, and the functions you are creating also has functions that other people have created, and it also has some of the standard Python functions. That's one key thing you'll be doing as a programmer. Okay, so you're always going to be using functions. In this case, we're using the len function. When you have a function that you're going to use, you need to learn how that function works. So we've seen that the print function, the input function, they can take in strings. Now let's see what the len function needs. Every function needs something to work, and every function has an output that it gives you, and some of them give you results that you need to store in variables. Okay, so now we're coming to function, the len function. We're also going to work with comparison operators, and we're also going to work with if-else conditions. Now, how are we going to do it? Now it has gone to the point where we've gone past welcoming the user. Now we want the user to put up a message. And when the user puts up a message, we're going to have to check the number of characters in that message. If it is less than or equal to 200, fine, we can print what the user is putting up. Otherwise, we have to print an error telling the user that they have entered beyond the limits. Okay, I hope it's clear. Now, how do we ask the user for their message? Can I have someone try it out? How do we ask the user for their message? How? Based on what we've learned so far, please, can someone make an attempt? Can someone make an attempt? Excellent. So we use the input function. Excellent, excellent. So at this point, let me just say something. Usually, the best way to learn programming is, in my own opinion, is when you're one-on-one with the tutor. So say we have a one-on-one session, and then you are, just with me as a tutor. Then what can happen is you would be the one typing the codes and running them. So you're typing it yourself. But in this class now, what's happening is that you guys are watching me. So you're not actually having that feel or that experience, So that's just me advertising that if you need this one-on-one training on, say, Python, data analysis, or JavaScript, then you can reach out to me. And we can have a session, and then it'll be faster. Then I also have a YouTube channel, which I will show you guys later. So I create videos and I put them out there. So far, I've been creating videos on data analysis, but I want to launch fully into Python. Like, I want to throw in a lot of Python videos very soon. So please subscribe to my YouTube channel. All right. So input function. Yes, that's what we're going to use. Now, one tip I would tell you is that for you to be a good programmer, you need to have that ability to learn what has been done before and redo it. Once you can do that, then you're on course to be good in programming. So we've done the task of asking the user for their entry before using the input function. Now we want to ask the user for a different entry. All we need to do is just redo what we have done before. And that's how we have the input function. So let's look at the code. Now, this is what the code looks like. This is what the code looks like. Don't be scared. Like I told you, the hint in understanding codes is for you to be able to trace. So you need to be patient. That's one. Be patient, and then take your time. Take your time. Take your time. Take your time and trace the connections. Trace the connections. As you're tracing the connections, you are looking out for variables, functions, and all kinds of things. So let's take the first line. The first line is pretty straightforward. Is what we have done. You input, type your message. That is what the user sees. So the user sees, type your message, and then we don't just leave it hanging. Whatever the user enters, we are storing it in a variable called message. Excellent. Next up, we're going to take whatever the user has entered, and then we're going to pass it to the learn function. We'll pass it or send it to the learn function, and the learn function will count the characters. And once it counts the characters, we want the value, whatever it has counted, to be stored in the variable called length. So you see, variables are very important for us to be able to take note of the results of functions. So that's the first two lines. And then we now come here. We now have to do some comparison. So now we're going to have to work with the comparison operators. I hope I got that correct. Yes, comparison operators. Okay, so comparison operators is how you compare things in programming. So you have three standard things. You want to check whether things are equal, or one is less than the other, or one is greater than the other. And now we begin to introduce a bit of, should I say, logical maths and all of that into programming. So now, for us to do comparisons, we use the if statement. That's a standard in all programming languages. Also in most programming languages, so whether it's JavaScript or wherever, you have if. So now the user has entered a message, we have received it. Remember, what the user entered is not visible here. It's only going to be available at runtime. That's when the program is running. But then we have stored it in this message variable. So stored it in message variable, and then we have checked. Now let's look at this. This learn function received the message variable. This learn function can also receive a string. But in this case, it is receiving a message variable, and that message variable is whatever was entered by the user following the input function. So now we counted it using the learn function, and we stored what we counted in the length variable. And now we have this if statement. So we're going to check if the length is less than or equal to 200. So if you look at it here, you will see you have if, then you have the condition we are checking, and then you have this colon here. So that is the syntax. So as we're picking it, we just need to learn, we just need to master the syntax. Okay, so here we go. Print. Okay, so we have the if statement helping us to compare. This is what we are comparing, and then we now have two parts. So in the first part, we have what should happen if the length is less than or equal to 200, which is fine with us. Then else, we'll now print what should happen if it is not less than or equal to 200, in which case, if it is greater than 200. So you see what's happening here. Now we're bringing in some logic, to test. So it's like we're comparing, we are testing, and based on the result of the test, we now print a message. So you now begin to see that this simple program that we're writing has a combination of when we are making requests from the user, when we are doing an activity, maybe based on that request, when we are giving information to the user, when we are doing some check or comparison. So you now begin to appreciate that there is this interaction between the programmer and the programming tool, and then also between the programmer and the user. You need to be able to picture that dynamic. It's like the program is an actor, the user is an actor, the programmer is the one who is directing. The programmer sees both of them, and then the programmer sends messages appropriately, receives messages, routes it, and that's what you have here. That's what programming is all about. So it's like, if you are the kind of person who can only act and you can't direct, you only know your role, then you can't be a programmer. But if you're the type who can do directing, script writing, you know the story of what is happening in the movie, or in this case, in the app, then you are good to go as a programmer. So what you have here is you've got, the message that came, we checked the message, now we are doing the condition. And then when you come here, you begin to realize that this is essentially the formatted string. You see the formatted string because after the print function, we have that F. So you've got the F there, and then you have this, your message is posted. Okay, so you have it there, your message is posted. And then you see now, you now make reference to the variable, the message variable in this type of different brackets. And in that case, it's going to go back. So when it comes here, it's going to go back and pick the message there. And then you typed, you see the length of characters is going to go to this length variable too. That is what's going to happen if everything is okay and the length is less than or equal to 200. But if it's not less than or equal to 200, it's going to print this message. Message too long, you typed, you know, it goes to the variable and then it puts the characters. Now, I hope this is clear. I hope this is clear. Okay, yes. All right, so let's run it. Yes. Okay, all right, thanks. All right, so now let's run it. So I'm running it and it says type your message. All right, so now let me type the message. I am feeling really happy today. Today was break for me from the office and I used it to visit ShopRite. Hello guys, I will invite you next time I have a break. So tell me, how was your own day? So the user is very excited and the user is typing. Hey, maybe the user has forgotten that there is a limit. Okay, so after typing all of this, I press enter and okay, wow. I thought I hit 200, but I didn't hit 200 though. I just hit 194. So can you see that it has given me the feedback? It said your message is posted.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so can you see that part here? Your message is posted. It posted everything for me. Okay, and then it now told me how many characters I typed. So can you see it? Can you see now the relationship between what you put in and what came out as the output of the program? So this is programming in practice. Okay, and I tell you, it's interesting. You know, it's one of those things that are interesting. So for example, like when you learn chess and you're good at it, it's very interesting because it broadens your mind. So it's the same thing with programming. If you ask me, I think everyone should have a feel of, you know, these tech skills. Have a feel of it, you know, maybe data analysis or programming. Learn these things and you get to see that it helps you. And then when you find the one that is interesting, you just continue. So this is what has happened here. We have it here. That's the message exactly as we wrote in the program. And then let's move on to the next one. And here we're now trying to see how we can format and clean our messages. Okay, so here we want to now improve the readability of usernames and messages. And then, so in this case now, remember we received the name of the user. Now we want to start working on usernames and messages. And we now want to see how we can clean what the user enters. Okay, so we're going to now start using some of the string functions. Remember, so far we have used print function to display on the screen, input function to receive an entry from the user, len function to count the number of characters of a string. Now we are going to see how we can use the title function and the upper function, the lower function, the replace function, and then we're also going to do string slicing. So now I want to make sure that the usernames are always capitalized. Now let's see what's going to give us, and this is what we have. How do we ensure that the username is always capitalized? Okay, so we say, let the user enter their name. So now let's look at this code. Now this code looks a bit more advanced than what we've been doing. It looks a bit more advanced. And what I just say is that it's like when you are writing sentences, you're learning English and you're writing sentences. So what is happening is some sentences are more complex than the others. Some of them have more punctuations and all of that. That's what is happening now. So now let's look at this statement. This statement is beginning to look a bit tricky. It's beginning to look a bit tricky. That's because, okay, we know this is a variable name. That is name. And we also know this is the input function, yes. And then this is straightforward. Enter your name. It's just a string that we're sending into the input function. And then here we now have a dot there, like a full stop. And then we have the title. That looks a bit tricky. Now let's try to explain it. What has happened here is that now we start understanding a statement that has a variable from the right. So we look at the right and then we understand what that variable called name, which is on the left, really means. So first we have the input function. That input function is going to make a request from the user for their name. When it makes a request from the user for their name, then whatever comes in, it will now apply this title function to it. So whenever you see a dot, what is happening is that whatever appears on the right is applied to whatever happens on the left. So in this case, this title function will be applied to the result of the input function. I hope it is clear. Don't worry, we'll get used to it. There are pretty some fundamental concepts that we're really learning in this first class. You know, it's kind of being rushed, but I'm going to make this video available. Now, so let's take it again. We're going to receive the input from the user, and then we're going to apply the title function to that input, and then we're going to send the result to the name variable. Now, once we've done that, that is for the name. Next up, we are going to use another input function to receive the message from the user and then send it to the message variable. That one is straightforward. And then we're now going to print in a formatted string the name, which is the username, and then says, then the message. Can we see this connection? Honestly, if you can understand this connection between the variables as they are used in the functions, you are good to go in programming. At this point, let's just go to ChatGPT and let's see how ChatGPT can help us to explain what this title function is doing in case we are not too sure. Okay, so it's taking some time to load. We're going to ChatGPT, and just for me to let you know that as you're doing your Python class or as you're learning it, always take advantage of tools like AI, you know, videos on YouTube. They will help you on the journey. All right, so now let me just run it whilst we wait for ChatGPT, and let's see what title does. So I'm running the code. Let's see what title will do. And then, okay, so we've got ChatGPT there. And okay, so let me just okay, so we've got ChatGPT here, and then I'm going to ask, you know, when it comes to ChatGPT, just see it like a friend or like an assistant. Tell me what the title function does in Python. I'm asking ChatGPT. And then I can go ahead to say, please explain in simple terms and be brief. Okay, so yes, so the title function is used with strings. It converts the first letter of each word in the string to uppercase and the rest to lowercase. So can you see that? So the first letter to uppercase and the rest to lowercase. All right, so let's see how it's going to play out. And so I'm coming back here and I'm to enter my name. And then now let me purposely enter my name in all caps, So let me say my name is, I'm going to pick someone in the class again. This time around, I'm picking Nicholas, and let me say I entered in all caps. So Nicholas likes to use this upper, you know, he uses upper and enters his name fully there. And then I press enter. Now type your message. Nicholas is saying, hello, I am in class. Chat with you later. Okay. And then enter. Can you now see what happens? Python has received his name in all caps and it has formatted it using the title function. And then Nicholas says, hello, I'm in class. Chat with you later. So can you see how this thing works, you know, with combining variables, you know, it's a combination, you know, these are simple programming units being shown here as a combination of activities that are done, results the activities give, variables where those results are stored, and then functions too that kind of combine it So you look at these 3 lines of code, and you see this is why Python is very much accepted in the world, because in many other programming languages, you can't really do things compact like this. You know, you have to have several lines of code. But in Python, you just have 3 lines of code. It's similar to like 3 simple sentences doing so many powerful things. There's a lot of connection. You know, the variables are connected, and then you see functions are doing lots of things. You have the input function, you have the title function, you have the print function, you have the formatted string, you have the variable here, variable assignments, variable calls, everything combined, you know. So that's it. I want to believe that, I don't know, but I just have a feeling that Chinese is a little bit more difficult than English. So maybe Chinese, you know, they have these complex characters and all of that. So maybe it will be easier for them to understand programming, you know, with all these connections, the characters, the codes, and all of that. So that's phase 4. Now let's go to phase 5. Phase 5 is really tricky, but don't worry, I'm going to rush it, you know, because of time. I'm going to rush it, but then you will have the video. You have the video, so you can go back and see what we've done. So what are we doing now? We're going to keep track of the chat history. We're going to use lists to store the messages, and we're going to use loops. These are fundamental concepts in programming. So what do we want to do? We want to allow the users to type multiple messages until they type exit. And then we want to display all the messages after exiting. So we're beginning to make it a bit complex now. Before, we'll just ask the user for the simple message, and then we'll format or do something on that message. Now we're going to ask the user for multiple messages. And what are we going to do? First of all, we have to use a particular type of variable to store the messages. In this case, we're using messages, but we are putting those messages in a list. So this is a variable, but it's not just a variable that receives one entry. It's going to receive many entries. And so we're going to put it in a list, and we're going to start with an empty list. So it's empty. And then we now have to have a condition to check when that variable is receiving results. And that's why we're using the while statement. We've covered quite a lot in this class. We've done if, now we're doing while. So what happens here is, while helps us to check that a particular thing that is being repeated is still being repeated. So we say while true, and then we put the colon. Let me at this point highlight the fact that we have indentation in Python. So I'm going back here just to show you that this print statement and this print statement are inside this if statement. They did not start on the same line with the if statement. That tells you that both of them are contained within these if statements, and this one too is contained within this else statement. So let's take note of that. So when you're looking at Python code, always take note of when you have this indentation. So you have like a tab that shifts the space of certain codes from a code on top of them. So this tells you here that all these codes here from this MSG all the way to this one are applied inside this while loop, or this while, what do I call it now? I call it while code block. Okay, so you have this code block from here to here, all contained under this condition. Okay, so while true, which means that while we'll still have the condition here as being true, what should happen? MSG is equal to input. So this message is given to the user. The user should type a message or should type exit to quit. All right, so now we say if whatever the user types with a lower function applied to it is equal to exit, then break. So what it means is that we stop this condition. That's the exit. That's the condition that breaks this while statement. And then we now have messages.append message. Okay, now this is tricky. This is quite advanced for a first class, but don't worry. This was happening here. We have MSG here, receiving the input from the user. And then here we're applying a lower function to MSG. We can go to ChatGPT and say, what about the lower function? And in this case, what it does is that it puts everything on lowercase, right? So it changes all letters in a string to lowercase. All you need to do is apply it after the dot operator to the variable in question. And in this case, that variable is from the input. And then equal to, we use 2 equal to when we are comparing. Okay, we use 1 equal to when we are assigning. We use 2 when we are comparing. and here we have exit. Okay, so we can decide to use one quote, or we can use double quotes, which we have been using before. So here we use one quote, and then we have this colon here, and then this is the condition that terminates this while loop. So the user will terminate it using exit. Okay, so if the user did not enter it, so you can see this break is also inside the if, or within the if execution. So if you look at this code now, from here to here is within the while execution, whereas this break now is within the if execution. So that's what we have. And then here, messages.append. Now we're using append function. What does the append function do? Let's go to ChatGPT. What about append? Okay. So ChatGPT can just help us, as an assistant that just, so it's saying here that the append function is used with lists and it adds a new item. So can you see, as the user keeps entering, what happens? Whatever the user enters will be appended to the messages list variable. Okay, so that's what's happening. And then here at the end, after we have fully executed this while loop, then we can print. So we'll print the chat history, and then we now use another loop, a for loop. So this for loop is going to take the messages list variable, and then it's going to loop through it one by one, and then print it, and then it's going to print it separated with this dash. Okay, this is quite really tricky, but I'm sure when you see it, you're going to appreciate it better. So now we're running it. So I'm going to type a few messages. So I'm going to type 1. I press enter. I'm still typing 2. I press enter. I type 3. I press enter. I type 4. I press enter. And then now I want to end. I type exit. And let me even type it EX like this. Remember, we use the lower function. So no matter how I type it, it's going to make it all lowercase, and then it's going to exit. So I type exit, and then let's see what happens. So can you see? It's now printing the chat history for me. All consistent with what we have in the code here. All consistent with what we have in the code here. Okay, so it prints it. So what you will do later is go back, watch it again, go through it again, and try to see the relationship between the code and the results. And what I advise you to do, make sure you type the codes yourself, and also make sure you take some notes. When you look at this code like this, many times what I do is that I print out the code, because I still work best with printed material. I print out the code and I start drawing lines. I start connecting the variables. I say, okay, this line, what is it doing? What's this function doing? What's this variable doing? What's this loop doing? What's this list doing? What's the statement doing? What's the connection? And sometimes when you print out a code and that code has like maybe 10 pages, you have to go back to some pages to see where a variable began, and then try to establish the relationship with where you are looking at it. So this is the first statement. We begin to see that the first statement helps you to run a loop. So in this case, the user was entering the user was responding to the input function several times, making several entries. Now we want to take them one by one. And so we use a for loop. We put the name of the variable there, the list variable there, and then we in statements, and then we define another variable here, m. So we say for m in messages. Remember, messages has several contents. We're not going to take it one by one. And then what do? We print a dash, and then we print m. M in this case stands for each entry in the messages list. So you begin to see the connections. You see M here, you trace it here. M is part of the messages. You trace the messages, you keep tracing it back to here. We see it as a list, and then we now begin to trace how everything happened. You have to be patient, you have to be detailed, not missing out anything, to see how it works. And can you see exactly, we have the dash and we have all the things I was entering. So that's that. And then finally, we're going to have the last thing which we're covering, and this is organizing our code with functions. Organizing our code with functions. And here we have been using functions. We've used the len, we've used len, we've used append, we've used print, we've used input, we've used lower, we've used title, We've used so many functions, and those are built-in functions. They come with the Python installation. Now we are going to create our own functions. Okay, remember I told you a lot of things you do in programming is creating functions to solve problems. And when you create functions to solve problems, you're going to be using some built-in functions in your function. You're also going to be using some functions that other people created, and that is how you solve problems. When you use functions, you get results. Those results, you can store them in variables. And then those variables, you can use them for all kinds of things. Okay, so now we want to clean up our code by creating reusable functions. Reusable. Remember, I talked about being able to do things over and over again. That's what programming is all about. And then we're going to use the def statement or keyword to define the functions. And then we're going to see parameters and return values. So what do we want to do? Create a send message function that takes username and messages as parameters, checks if the message length is valid, and returns the formatted message or error. So can you see, wow, this is really short. Python helps you to do things quick and short and compact. It's not like that in other programming languages, so we're almost at the end. So what do? We use def. Okay, so let me ask ChatGPT, is def in Python a statement or a keyword? So I want to be sure that I'm using the right this thing here. Okay, so def is a keyword. All right, remember I said statement. Okay, so it's a keyword. Okay, so programming languages, they differ. Okay, all right, so sorry, it's certainly not a statement, it's a keyword. It can't be a statement. All right, so a statement is like a line of code, if I'm correct. Let's go back to ChatGPT and say, what is a statement in Python? I think it's a complete line of executable code, or maybe lines. Okay, it's a line of code that does something like creating a variable, calling a function. Okay, so it's important that we also know some of these words. So it's a complete instruction that Python can run. Good. All right, so now we use def, and then we put our function name. In this case, it is send_message. Okay, so it's a name that depicts what it's doing, and we use underscore to separate the two words. You can have a variable name or a function name with spaces. Okay, so we use underscore, and then we have our parentheses here, and then we have two variables there. We have user, and then we have MSG, and then we have this colon. Always take note of where you have a colon. A colon tells you that there is something coming after that is defined by what is on top. So def is just to tell us that we are defining the function. So here we are creating the function. So we create the function, and when you're creating a function, you need to put what the function needs. In this case, the function needs user and MSG. Those are the two parameters separated with a comma. And then we have this column here that tells you all of this. So we have user and MSG. Now what happens is we're going to check if the number of characters of MSG is less than or equal to 200, and then we return. Okay, so now the function is requiring these two parameters to work, but the function is also going to give a result. The result that the function will give is what comes after return. Okay, so if it is less than or equal to 200, then our result will be user.title says this. If you look at this very well, you see that all of this we've done before. So if you trace what we did before in the previous phases, you'll be able to appreciate the relationship between this. So you take the user variable, apply the title function, which makes only the first letter there capitalized, and then we now say says, then we now put the message there. Else we have this error message. Okay, so this error message prints shows the number of characters of the message, which is more than what is expected. All right, so now what happens here is that this is a formatted string, if you remember. Okay, that's a formatted string. So that's a formatted string that expects something external. In this case, the result of the variable after we apply title function, and in this case, the variable MSG. And then now, now there's something about Python. There's this connection. So now what's now happening is we send underscore message and with 2 parameters here into the print function. Now, what's happening here is that if you can understand this code, as in you can trace all the connections, all the variables, the function and everything, then you have made quite some significant progress in programming. I can assure you that. Quite some significant progress. If it's going to take you 3 days, whatever it will take you to understand this code, I'll tell you, you've made progress. So this code now has 2 parts. The first part is where we define the function. The second part is where we test the function. So we are testing the function. Now look at it here. This print function is receiving send underscore message function. Is receiving send underscore message function. So let's go back and see what send underscore message function needs. It needs 2 parameters separated by comma. First is the user, second is the message. When the user comes, what it will do is that it will apply this function on the user. When the message comes, what it will do is that it will check the message, and then, so that's what's going to happen. You just have to understand the relationships. So look at send underscore message here, look at send underscore message. In this case, the user here is the string Ada, and the message in this case is hello pie charts. So let's run it. What are we expecting? Expecting that this would execute. Once this is called, it will go and look for where send underscore message is defined, and then it will assign the parameters accordingly. Run this check, compare, and then give the results. Okay, so let's run it and see. So can you see Ada says hello pie charts? All right, so that brings us to the end of this class. This was quite an introduction. Quite an introduction. We covered quite a lot of things, and the good thing is that it is project-based, problem-solving based. We took a project, broke it down into 6 steps, and here we have the results.